gentlemen, thank you for accepting our invitation to this event and welcome at the National Stadium. Today, instead of enjoying sport event, we are going to enjoy rather food for thoughts, the lecture given by Professor Patricka Aebischera. But I won't introduce Professor Patricka Aebischera because my boss, Prime Minister Gowin, will do it much more better than I. So now I would like Prime Minister Gowin to say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, in today's world, innovative economy is one of the factors which show the potential of nations. To create innovative ecosystem, we need synergy between government, business and academic institutions. Poland's greatest challenge for upcoming years is to shift our economy from imitative to innovative, to become one of the leaders in the competitiveness race. Dear guests, it is really great honor for me to introduce Professor Patricka Aebischera, the great scientist, science and innovation manager and businessman. Professor Patricka Aebischera has been the president of École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne since 2000. After having many successes in the US, he returned to Switzerland, and in the 15 years of his tenure, he led extraordinary transformation of EPFL from a good Swiss high school to one of the world's leading universities of technology. The model of EPFL is a hybrid of the European and American academic behavior. 2/3 of its faculty are international top-rated academics who, besides delivering outstanding academic performances, interact closely with private companies. The campus of EPFL is an incubator for innovative startups achieving impressive results. The EPFL itself is now considered to be one of the most dynamic and effective research and innovation organization in the world. Today we have a unique opportunity to listen and discuss with Professor Aebischera his views on emerging science and business and actions he took when reforming EPFL. Professor Aebischera, thank you very much for your visit and for unrivaled opportunity to become acquainted with your comprehensive experience. Professor Aebischera, the floor is yours.
Prime Minister, thanks a lot for your kind introduction, too kind introduction, should I say. And let me tell you how excited I am to be here. This has been my first visit to Poland, and it is a great pleasure to discover your country, but also your ambition in the world of academia. And what you told us yesterday, I think was very telling, that every country needs leading university because, in fact, universities now are tightly linked with economic development. And I think this is not only a problem of Poland, but I think it's a problem of the entire Europe, is to have what we call world-class research universities. This is the huge advantage of the United States, as you know, and we always say when we talk about Silicon Valley would not be where it is if there wouldn't be a Stanford or a Berkeley. Or if we talk of Route 128 in the Boston area, it wouldn't be there if there wouldn't be MIT or Stanford or Harvard. And I think the question of Europe is we have very good basic indication. We should be proud of our education system, including the tertiary. But what we're missing is a kind of elite university that drives, in fact, European economy. And the question really is how can you build this? And in fact, I will try to give you this small example of my institution that you could see here, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, and of course in a nice location. But this is a young university created in '69, the second technical federal university of Switzerland. Now, before saying this, I want just to remind people that when we talk about world-class research university, you see that United States, have more than 50%. This is according to the Shanghai, but I think if you take the other ranking like QS or Times Higher Education, the difference would be even bigger. So it shows that, this is the main drive of the US economy. Now, what you see is a couple of countries are present. Of course, Switzerland is a bit of an exception, having 5 or 6 top universities in its top 100, which compared to the size of the country, of course, is quite unusual. And I would say 50% of the Swiss students can study in a 100 top university of the world. So it is a very unique situation that we are in. And we should ask ourselves, what the people often ask us, is there a recipe for it? Now, why are we talking also about that much about universities? There was a very interesting recent paper in The Economist entitled Creative Destruction. It was very frightening to some extent. It says that, in the current situation, the rising tuition fees, change in demand, disruptive technologies will change how universities will be. Now, just to give you an example, in the US, the debt related to fellowships is $1.2 trillion. So there is also in the American system a flaw. This is unaffordable in the coming years. The second thing is they say that within 15 years, more than half of the universities will be bankrupt. So this is not a very, joyful situation to be in. The third thing they said, lifelong learning is coming, and there's a need to re-educate the workforces. And of course, the digital revolution that is going on will become a key factor. Now, why are we now at the center? Why are we, in fact, invited by various countries, politicians, and so on, to talk about universities? I think it's very clear that universities have become a major actor in the development of knowledge-based economy. That's why, there is a great attention about what are we going to do with our universities. The second thing is financing from the public sector is not able to keep pace with the growing needs and cost of modern science and higher education. And that's really one of the true challenge. And that's why you need to bring new sources of financing our institution. Not to say that the state should disappear, not at all. It should, ensure the basic financing, but it is not sufficient. And that's why we have to link with different sources of financing. So, and the conclusion is universities have to diversify their sources of income. Now, just another picture to show the comparison, between the OECD average and the United States. Now, you could see that OECD is 1.7% of GDP, the United States is 2.7%. You see private part of expenditure for education, 32% in OECD, 65% in the US, and total expenditure per student in higher education, $40,000 versus $26,000. So to some extent, education is expensive, but as a famous president of Harvard said, ignorance is even more so. So I think we have to, deal with it. Now, the other fourth thing, whenever we speak about American universities, we always envy them. And of course, one thing is the endowment. And those numbers, of course, are very impressive. When you look at Harvard University, that's more than $35 billion of endowment. I don't know if some of you have been to the trading floor of Harvard University. It is like a major bank. And I think this ensures about a third, if not more, of the financing of the universities. Now you can see this is reserved to very few. So I always say that if you go in the University of Southern Nebraska, it is not the case. So the United States have very good elite universities, but the average university is probably not as good as Europe. So, and it is more difficult to have an average. So I think paradoxically, we might be in a better situation by having this because we can build on something strong. And I think the entire Europe, when you look at it, has strong basic education. Now, the key thing is how to build a couple of those elite universities on top. Now, Europe is starting to have endowment, but it's mainly the UK. And with the exception of Oxford and Cambridge, you can see that even UCL or Manchester is really negligible in terms of its endowment. We do not have a tradition of endowment in the United States, in Europe. So let me come back to the Swiss situation and to what we have tried to do those last couple of 15 years. Now, I am leading this institution, EPFL. This is the little sister of another institution called ETH Zurich. Now, this institution was created in 1856 by the federal government. In Switzerland, the universities are controlled by the cantons. We have only 10 universities, which I understand is very different from your country, proportionally for 8 million inhabitants, and only 2 that are federal, and those are the technical ones. Because in the 1850s, the cantons didn't think that technology was that important and could not mix with universities. And that's where, it's very rare in Switzerland, the federal parliament has created a university. And in '69, they've decided that they needed to create a second one in the French part. We're in Lausanne, as you know, Switzerland's about 70% German, 20% French, and about 10% Italian. And I should be very careful with the ambassador, about 1% Rétoromanche, or something, which is our 4th national language. His wife is from this part of the country, so I have to be very careful of what I'm saying. And then you can see we have 4 research institutes. Now, interestingly, the Federal Council, which is our executive branch, through the parliament, decides to, in fact, donate the system of 2.5 billion. This is what we receive from the parliament over 4-year mandate, and on average, so now we're just discussing the bill, which is 10 billion. So it's a major investment for, once this is done, we have a lot of autonomy about strategy, nomination of faculty, and also financing. And that's the toughest one, because now we are under the same board. So those 2 universities, which are world-class research universities today, it's like if you would put Oxford and Cambridge under a single board, or Harvard and MIT under a single board. So, you know, we're great friends until we discuss about resources allocation. So we fight once a year, and then, but overall, they have 50% of the budget, I have 25%, and the other research institutes, which are on water, materials, snow and forest, and big large equipment, receive the other 25%. Now, we are ex officio member of the board, 1 representative of the research institute, and the rest of the board is independent. So there's 10 people, okay, and we received this mandate. So we are, and that's something that is probably very unusual, we're not elected, we're nominated. Now, there's a lot of discussion about should you be elected or nominated, but we are nominated, okay, which is one of the challenge. Because once you're nominated, and I was trained as a medical doctor, and one day I was thrown, literally parachuted, at the head of an engineering school, and it's not that easy, because you want the faculty to be with you, and that is a big challenge. Now, however, you can take tough decisions, because you're not elected. So I would have probably never passed an election the first 4 years. I pretend that I would be elected today. But again, I would have to go through an election. Now, this school, EPFL, was federalized in '69. It had existed before as an École Polytechnique of the University of Lausanne. It was a small school, 800 to 900 students. And in '69, we moved to the federal system. And we've started to build a campus outside the city, so really from scratch. Now, when I took over in 2000, our dream, and I had spent close to 10 years in the United States at Brown University, and I was supposed to be on the faculty at MIT. I had received an offer, and I decided to do something that people thought was a bit crazy. I turned down the offer, and I decided to come back to Europe. And this is important in the sense that a lot of us in the United States who are from European ascendant, in fact, we love the United States because it's a great country, you know, to go up the ladder. You know, the sky is the limit, as they say. But we like Europe. I liked Europe. I like European lifestyle. I could never, as I always say, be passionate by baseball and something like that. I like the opera. I like good food. I like the center like we had last night in those wonderful restaurants. Things that I didn't like. I wanted my kids to be educated in Europe because I have great respect for the kind of education that we have in Europe. But of course, when you want to come back from the top universities, you would not do this at any price because you want to continue your academic career. And that's really the difficulty. So what our dream, several of us, was to transform what we thought was a good engineering school into a world-class technical university. To do this, we need to do a couple of things. Increase the critical mass of students, enlarge the scientific perimeter. We didn't have life science, for example. It is unthinkable today in engineering not to have life science. Life science is the heart of the medical revolution. You could not do genome sequencing, you could not do implants and so on without the engineering. So you needed to have at the heart, and it's not sufficient to collaborate with the university or the hospital. You need to have, the life science in. So we started a new life science department. We also ameliorated the research output by increasing the quantity and quality of students. And something that we always like when we're in the United States is develop a lively campus. My campus was nice from 8 to 6, but then it was dead. And the weekend it was dead. When you go to MIT, you see lights in the laboratories on the weekends at nights. And I said, that's where they beat us because, there's this drive to become competitive. This is what we're missing. But we shouldn't forget, for example, if you want to work at night, as we were outside the city, you couldn't eat. So you would take the tram, go to the city, and then you don't come back. You have to have the student life, on campus. This was something very important for us. So I will not go to the detail, but we reorganized the institution. We closed all departments to create schools. We had professional deans. We did something which was very important. And if there's one thing that I think has been the most important factor, we introduced something called the tenure track. Probably as several of you know, this is the most important recipe of the United States. I was on a tenure track. As I will say, when you're an assistant professor in Europe, you're often the assistant of the professor. In the United States, you are independent. And I think what we need to do in Europe is give independence to the young, bright, ambitious people. This is a fantastic tool. And, we went up the ranks through. Now you don't have a life, appointment. You just have to prove. Usually we have 8 years at EPFL that you're top researchers, that you're going to get the great publication, that you're going to get your ERC, that you teach, that you start new companies like startups. Then you will be promoted and get your tenure as an associate or full professor. This is the most important reform that we did beyond all the thing. And I think what we're missing in Europe is this tenure track system, is to give hope to the young and bright that they don't have to wait for the full professor to retire or to die to replace him. But because you're going to take him, if he's good and he gets his ERC and so on, he will be promoted. So it's called merit-based systems. This is probably what is missing the most in Europe. And it is not a question of Poland, of Switzerland, it's a question of the entire Europe, okay? That's a disease that we have to fix as fast as possible. Now, where are we today? So you can see we had 4,000 students in 2000, we have 10,000 students, 380 faculty, we had 160 at the time, about 3,000 staff. You can see that we're close to 1 billion budget. Swiss francs is close to euros, so you could more or less translate it, certainly in dollars. But I think, our budget was 420 in 2000, so we more than doubled the budget. And of course, there is no miracle. You have to have financial means. Now, what you could see, this is what the Swiss Confederation pays. This is what we get from the outside. And this budget is more or less flat. This one is increasing. So I think, you have to be able to increase your external budget. This is the most. And now how to do it is a key thing. Now, with all this, of course, we have to live with rankings, as you know. So we hate them, but they exist. and they're a very important way of attracting the students. So you could see, depending on the QS times education, we were not present in 2000, at all in those things. And you can see, and we have been the fastest rising university in the ranking. And now for 2 years, we are the #1 ranking of the Times Higher Education under 50 and the young universities. And who are the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth? They're all Asian. So that's also something which is very telling. The young shark, what we call the tiger universities, are coming from Asia. So we have to be able to compete and to transform ourselves into the new institution. Now, and what I'm being always asked is there a recipe for becoming a top-class university? And I've put a couple of things, and I'll go back through this, but I think the most important is attract the good students, to go online, to attract the best faculty, promote tech transfer, this is extremely important, develop, I said, an attractive campus, obtain adequate financial support, state, but also private. I'm going to underline, you cannot rely only on the state. You have to have this internal system and improve the university management. The students now, population, you could see, more than 50% now of the students are foreign. Where do they come from? Europe, but also Asia, Africa, America. So that's probably very unusual for this country. Switzerland is a very international country, so we need to rely. As in the French part of Switzerland, we're barely over 1 million. So how do you make a world-class research university? You cannot make it out of 1 million. You don't have the raw material. So you have to go and get people where they are. And now, I've said, we have Polish students. We would like to have more. We have 47 students from Poland. But more importantly, we have 10,000 students online. I'll come back to that, which is interesting. And as I told you, Minister, you seem to be very interested in computer science. You have a very strong basis of students taking top computer science courses. And I think this is, probably extremely interesting in the future. Good students come a lot from Europe. After the bachelor, they come mainly for masters. As I said, usually students go to the closest university than their home, their parents, for the bachelor. At the master and PhD, the good students look for good places. And that's where we try to attract some of the best students. Now, where do they come from? At the undergrad, it's bachelor, because we teach, our bachelor is French, okay? The master's is taught in English, and the PhD courses too. This is extremely important. If you want to attract the best students, you have to teach in English today. Before the First World War, it was in German. Today, it's in English. Maybe in 50 years, it'll be in Chinese. I don't know. But today, it's English, certainly in technology. If you do not teach in English, you will not be able to attract the best students, by definition. Because, you will have the very few that want to learn your own language, but otherwise, it's not, feasible. So now, the professors, you have to realize, I'll come back, 70% of our professors are foreign. So about a third of them do not speak a word of French. So when they come from Europe, from Poland, whatever, they learn French. The Americans, they say they will learn in 2 years, but none of them are able. So they continue to teach in English. So even though our language, our official language is French, a lot of the courses are already taught in English at the bachelor level. And we're lucky enough that as we're a multi-language country, this is not an issue in Switzerland. You have to attract the students by, appealing subjects. So we've done, we did the America's Cup, where we won the America's Cup for a country that doesn't have an access to an ocean. It was a bit weird. We built the fastest boat on Earth at 50 knots. It's 100 kilometers an hour. I was on this boat. It's frightening. It's sometimes dangerous to be a president of a university because you have to do crazy things. I did not go in this plane because it's only a one-seater. And this was the solar impulse. It's started by Bertrand Piccard in our universities, but it's going around the world. It flew over the Pacific, only propulsed by solar. What is important is the dream that it gives to the students, but also it learns. There are 30 laboratories that works together. So it's not one man, one lab, one ego, but it is, you have to work together to get this damn solar plane to fly. So I think this is the kind of thing that where those projects are important. Now, on education, I think we're living this incredible changes about the potential revolution that is going on. As I said, usually, it's clear. We have a location, our university, classrooms, and the age is between 18 and 25 on average. Today, our students are all over the world through online technology. This is the map of our student that take our online education. We just started this less than 3 years ago, and you literally have the map of the world. Now, they're online, and their age is broader. We have bright kids, 10 years, taking physics courses. But we also have people in their 80s that want to continue to get their brain active, which I think is very important. Why this is possible? Because of the revolution in tablets, bandwidth that can look at videos, cloud computing, social networks, students work together. So I went to Africa. I was in Douala, in a cyber cafe. People will work in a cyber cafe over there together through social network, taking our courses. And of course, the new generation is digital. So they're used to those two. They will not go back to the old textbooks. We are writing new online textbooks. So we took a first course. This is one of our most famous professors called Martin Odersky. And what he did, he's the father of Scala. And Scala is a programming language used, for example, in Twitter and Amazon. And I think what is interesting, we put this course on this platform called Coursera for those famous MOOCs, massive open online courses, and you got 50,000 students. But more interestingly, 10,000 took the final exam. This is more than our entire life, usually. If you calculate, if you teach for 30 years, you will not have 10,000. So now he gave the course, I think, 5 times. So he has had, a gigantic amount of students. And as a branding, he's becoming a star. Even interestingly, education, gives you feedback as much as research through this online education. This is our students, but maybe it's easier to see it. This is where our students are. So you can see a lot of our students in the United States, but also in Brazil, in India, in China, and of course a lot in Europe. Even in Africa, the western part of Africa, because half of our courses are taught in French, half our courses are taught in English. Interestingly, you see the numbers. Today we have more than 1 million students online. We register 10,000 students per week on our online education, which is more than what we have on campus. So this is showing that the world is changing, but the majority of those are in continuous education. And I think this is also, now we start to give statement of accomplishment. The question, are we going to deliver diploma online? This is really the certification is the big challenge of universities of tomorrow. And of course, we are debating with the top universities, with my colleagues at MIT, at Stanford, and so on, how far should we go? This is something that is very new for all of us. So I think there will be a complementary to campus education. They will be very important for continuous education, but also they're an interesting or powerful tool for developing countries. But more important so, if you want to become a world class, they help you tremendously to build your brand. And people don't like when I say this, but the top university are brand. They are even super brands. In the middle of China and India, everybody knows Stanford, MIT, Harvard. In Europe, except Oxford and Cambridge, we don't have super brands. So I think we have to build those brands. Why? Because they attract the best students, but also the best faculty. So in this kind of sense, online education helps you. Recruiting professors is key. So this is where you see the most important is the tenure track. Where did we recruit them? You could see a lot in the United States in the top schools, but also in Europe, like Max Planck, MIT, Caltech, Berkeley, and so on. Full professor. We're also able to attract some of them, like those who were full professor at MIT. We were able to convince them to come to EPFL, to leave MIT. Now, of course, you could see through their name, Marzaris, Delaci, Kozirakis, they're not true Americans. They were Europeans that want to come back. Now, if you're Greek, it's difficult, and you're professor at Stanford, it's difficult to go back to Greece for all the reason that and the infrastructure is not there and so on. But to some extent, coming to EPFL or ETH Zurich or to Max Planck is something that they will do. And I think, and this is key for us. And those guys attract the young ones. So the stars attract the future star. And I think you have to have a good mixture of both. And that's why we recruit in green assistant professor tenure track, associate and full professor. So you could see we attract a good mix of junior. I think it's very important to continue to attract. So now a lot of the, several now, faculty that we recruit junior have, for example, an offer at Harvard, an offer at Stanford, and decide not to take it and to come to EPFL. That's what we have to do, is we have to keep our best and brightest, or to re-attract them back to Europe. Now, they're very efficient. If you have good professors, they're very powerful. So now I've just counted before, we have 126 ERC at EPFL for 360 faculty. So you could say that about a third of our faculty have an ERC grant, which is quite unusual. It's more than Italy in total. So for one school. So, but this is not because I'm there with the whip and saying you should go and apply for an ERC. It's just good professors go. And in the tenure track, more than 50% of the junior faculty have an ERC. So now there is self-stimulation. So if you don't have an ERC, you feel like a second-class citizen. So by definition, you will try. So you create this kind of, get-going attitude to go and get the ERCs. As I told you, the faculty now is, before in 2000, it was 63% Swiss. The Swiss have decreased at the expense of the Europeans, but often they come from the United States. And I think for us, we're not Swiss, we're Europeans. I think in science, our countries are too small. The continent is the right size for. We have the 500 million that we need. So for us now, of course, some countries would have maybe a harder time to accept to have that many foreign professors, but this is quite amazing about Switzerland. This is accepted. Now, so we go only by merit. Good professors attract a lot of grants, so that's obvious. So the funding is very much dependent on the quality of the professors that attract, the grants. And with the overhead linked to the grants, you pay part of the of your structure. Now, and I often say, because often the government, of course, are interested about translation, the economy, and it is part of our task. But we have to remind them that without basic research, there will be no translation. So we have, and the function of the state is to support the basic research, because it is impossible for companies to do it. So I think we should always insist that as much that we will engage in translation, in creating startups and so on, you need the basic disruptive discoveries. Those will be the new companies of tomorrow. So I think this is extremely important to remind people. So the areas should be as broad as they can, and at EPFL we've put a lot of emphasis on what we call the info-nano-biocogno convergence. That means, as you know, in science there is a convergence between information technology, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and cognitive science. This creates a deluge of data, and I think we're lucky enough that the information theory can extract the machine learning, the deep learning, the artificial intelligence tech tools can extract meaning out of the data. And we all are very much, I think, convinced that we're living a unique time where this is happening, and we have to put strength. This is also good for countries that may not have as much financial means, because this is what I call cheap research to some extent. You need just brains, and a computer. If you want to do particle physics, you need real infrastructures. So I think this is something that we should also remind. So we also launched a couple of big projects, and probably the most well-known was the Human Brain Project, highly debated. That was one of the two Fed flagship projects. But yes, we got it, and it's a 1 billion euro project, but we are leading it. But interestingly, it's not just an EPFL. It was started at EPFL by somebody called Henry Markram that made the hypothesis that you could simulate some of the functions of the human brain through a supercomputer fed with the data of neuroscience. Now, this is a very interesting, very bold statement, But what we see, the United States have launched their own US brain with 4 billion. The Chinese have, the Israeli have. So you can see that the brain. Now, I'm a neuroscientist, I must admit. So I think that, neuroscience is kind of the next frontier. That, at least in the life science, it is also dedicated to disease. I think, 1/3 of the disease of mankind is related to brain disease. And with the aging population, of course, degeneration, neurodegenerative disease are going to be a very important part also of the social cost. So we need to find also a better solution in this. So, and of course, this leads to great publication, like the Cell publication, the longest Cell publication ever recently. So all this is nice. There's another area that I like very much, which I think Europe has an edge. It's called digital humanities. I know that the University of Warsaw, for example, is also engaged in this. I think this is also a kind of crazy project that we want to digitize the entire archives of Venice. This is, after the Vaticano, the second biggest archives in the world. It's correlated. So the idea is to make kind of a Google of the past, because there's sufficient data that you can simulate the activities that was happening in the last 500 years. Now you have a little problem because it's more than 80 kilometers of documents, and that would take us 45 years. But we've developed new technologies with the tomographic, which means that you can digitize books without opening them. Now, interestingly, as the books are not straight, we had to realign. But it was interesting, it was a genome sequencing technologies that was useful to realign the papers got through tomography. And now with machine learning, semantic, you can try to extract data. Now, they were writing differently over the 500 years. Those are fantastic deep learning projects. But I think this is one area where Europe, it's easier to do this in Europe than to do it in Nebraska, because we have the raw material, which is history. And of course, this is the kind of thing that we should position. And I believe that the future Fed flagships could be in those areas. Again, an area of convergence, even of humanities, with computer science. So those are the kind of thing we like to do at EPFL. To go a bit on the ambitious, but important. Now, we do not forget the big project like the energy. We have 50 laboratories working in energy, in solar, and so on. So we also very strongly involved in global issues. And I think this is the way, at least technical universities should engage in global issues. Energy, aging, those are the kind of things that we know will affect society, mobility, and so on. So we should not only see our disciplines, but we should look at global issues and where do we need more knowledge to try to solve those problems. That's a bit the way we take it. Last thing is we need to promote. If you have great research, you can promote a tech transfer. Now, if I would ask you like this, what are the most innovative companies that you would think? If I would ask you to give the 10 most innovative companies, we would probably agree. We would probably say what? The Googles, what? Facebooks, that's it. Tesla, maybe today, those are. Where are they? So I put a couple of them, The drama, none from Europe. So we had SAP, but it's a bit less exciting, or Skype. It was bought by Microsoft. That's where we need in Europe to be more innovative. We should have the ambition to create, the unicorn of the 21st century. That's where we still have a way to go. That's what we've built our science park on this, what we call info-nano-biocognitive convergence again. So to do this, you need to create an inspiring ecosystem. You need to bring large companies on various campuses. And you also need to attract, world-class venture capitalist groups, because that's the difference. I have made personally 3 companies, 2 IPOs, one on the NASDAQ when I was in the United States, one on the Swiss stock market. And I can tell you, it's much more difficult to do it in Europe than it is in the United States. But it is changing, that's the good news. And in fact, EPFL had a success. Logitech, in fact, I was very pleased that this is a Logitech device. And this was started with the mouse at EPFL, and this gentleman, Daniel Borges, the founder, and really 30 years after, Logitech is still present, still inventing the future with sales of 2 billion. That was a garage company that started from EPFL. Now you say it's not Facebook, but if you have several 2 billion companies, you're fine. So this is the number of companies that we start every year. So I don't know. I hope that there is a Google there, but I don't know which one it is. But I think, you will not have a Google just like this. It's a problem of numbers. So the day you create a lot of them, some of them will really develop. And I think this is key. But more important than the numbers is how much venture capital is invested in those companies. So you could see that in 2000, it was a small number. There are variation, but now you could see that for several years, we had more than 100 million venture cap investment on our campus. This year, we're the big of the year, we're already 150. In fact, since last week, we're 180. So we will be probably at 300 million venture cap invested on our campus. Now, interestingly, this is 70% of the Swiss venture cap, which for us, our friends in Zurich, is kind of amazing. So they're working hard, and that's where you need some competition in the system, and they will challenge us. But this is good for the country. Monopoly is always a problem, as you know. So today we've created this science park on campus. So we have about 110 presently incubating. But now the most important thing, if you have those startup, the large companies come. Because the large companies are always concerned of what we call the Kodak syndrome, missing a technology that would threaten the development. So they're coming on campus, not to tell us what to do. Sometimes some of our politicians say it's dangerous. The big companies can have them themselves. What they're interested is the disruptive innovation. And the disruptive innovation always come from universities. And that's why they come. And you create jobs. So that you can see some of the big companies there that are on campus. They came recently because of the startups, because of the research laboratories. That's what they want to do. So you create this kind of ecosystem on your campus. This is fundamental. So you could see this was our campus in '69. So as you could see, it was an agriculture field. This is today. So there was close to 2 billion invested in construction, and we have invested 1 billion in the last 10 years. But 70% of this billion was done through public-private partnership. So it was not the state. We did it. And I think it was very important. For example, the science park, that's where the startups come and the large companies. So we built it. We got a loan from UBS. And now it's profitable. So it brings companies, it brings venture cap, but as we rent them, we are making a profit. So it is a very interesting system. So we would never had the money from the state to do this, but the state accepted to do a public-private partnership. We did the same thing here. We have a Congress house with all student housing, shops, and so on, because we're outside of city, and we hope that this one day will also become profitable. So you could see that we have engaged in a lot of construction, student housing, laboratories, of course, but also hotel, innovation, tech convention center, so as to create this campus there. And I like architecture, so as we had no old buildings, we had to go for new ones. So for example, we built this Rolex Learning Center. Now, as you can imagine, Rolex is there for not for nothing because they sponsor it. This is our new library. It was designed by a Japanese architect, a female. She received the Pritzker Award for this building, which is the Nobel Prize of Architecture. And she's the only, there's only 2 women that ever got the Pritzker Award. So, of course, this gave us instant visibility. This is used in all the architecture books and so on. But more important, the students love it. It's open from 7 o'clock to midnight every day, Saturday, Sunday included, except on Christmas and New Year's Day. So you can see, and it's full. At night, it's full. The weekend, it's full. So instead of having a library of physics, a library of this, a library of that, it's only one. And to be honest, the libraries are not useful today because kids do not look books. But what they are interacting in this from the diverse discipline. This is probably the most important thing. So we create the Swiss Tech Convention Center. This is student housing. We have shops and so on. And this is where companies come and do their meetings, but also we organize scientific meetings. And this is important because it brings people to our campus. This is also something that we believe is important. So now here we are in Lausanne. we've started to create a couple of hubs around antennas in Neuchâtel, in Fribourg, in Sion, but more important here in Geneva. We bought a new building. Two of my friend billionaires, in fact, I should admit, I've convinced them to buy back a building that was closed by Merck at the time, because one of the guy that did the America's Cup was the owner of this company called Ares Serono, which was one of the two big companies in fecundation hormones and so on. And he sold it to Merck for 16 billion. And 6 years after, Merck decided to close. So I went back to him and said, you could not let this happen. You should buy back the building. And I had another billionaire that was also interested to be part of it. So they bought back the thing. Now one billionaire gave me 100 million to develop a new center of neural prosthesis. Mr. Ernesto Bertorelli also gave me 4 endowed chairs. And now I'm flying tomorrow to Boston to try to convince them to double the gift. Now, I have to spend a lot of time doing this. You have to like it. But it is important. I think it shows that you can do this fundraising in Europe also. People thought that could only be done in the United States. So, and I will finish there in the sense that the last thing, of course, is funding and also the management. So I think when we need to diversify. So, for example, continuous education. With the MOOCs, we're starting, at least some of them will be profitable. For example, Johns Hopkins has a MOOC on big data that makes 10 million a year. Our Scala course will probably make several million. They will not all make. If you have particle physics, it's unlikely that your MOOC in particle physics will bring you a lot. But some of them will. And I think we should also try to make resource. Continuous education in medical field is also a possibility. Competitive research funding, carrying the overheads, very important. Innovation-related income, license fees, startup participation. We take a stake in those startups, and of course, when they sell them or when they go public, we can get some money back. Fundraising, building, chairs, sponsorships, develop creative ways of financing infrastructure. I said public-private partnership, the way we did, for example, the Innovation Quarter or the Swiss Tech Convention Center. So the last thing, of course, is the potential. You have to have a certain leadership. So often people say, what is a leader of a university? And I always take this quote from Chuck West, the past president of MIT, who was my mentor to some extent in this job. And he said something that I thought is so true. He said, an academic institution is not like an orchestra with the president as a conductor. He said, MIT is more like a jam session among a lot of talented musicians who listen to each other and get into the flow. The president, provost, deans, and other administrators strive to hire the right musicians. That's our job. Draw the themes from the evolving music and keep the beat going. So we are the drummers to keep the beats. And I say I'm the main drummer of the institution to keep the beat going. He said something also very interesting that I love. That's more for our politicians. They always want to have planning. And I'm not saying that planning is not important. But, planning over several years is very difficult, specifically in science. So he said, an academic institution evolves 50% by planning and 50% by serendipity. And he always said, that I didn't put in the quote, he said, and the second is more important than the first, is to capture the serendipity. And I think this is a job of academic leaders, is to pick up the right people, the right field, that will become the fields of tomorrow. So in this sense, and I will finish there, is I hope that there's not a single recipe. I was just there to try to share what we have tried to do at EPFL. But I think my dream is to see this kind of things like tenure track, competitive merit base and so on, spread in Europe. Because I would say, we know dumber than the Americans. In fact, we probably be at least as good. But as we don't have often the right system, this system impedes us to develop our capabilities. And I think we have to change a couple of simple structural things for the meritocracy to develop, which is the only rule in academia. I always said if all the Asian and European faculty would leave the United States in one day, probably the American system would fall apart. So we are contributing tremendously to the American system. Now we have to reform a little bit our system because we're also being challenged by Asia. And when you look in the Times Higher Education, the rise of Asian universities, for example in Korea, is quite impressive. And in a very short amount of time, they were able to do a lot. So if we do not reform our system, we might be in trouble. And our little experience, and every situation is different. There's no general recipe. But I think what I tried to do, and of course, success is never final. And, you know, we have to keep. And as you go up, I would say in the ranking, you know, the air is thinner at the top. So it's harder to become the very top. And of course, you need to have a lot of things, including finances. And I said always, you know, now they are comparing Zurich and Lausanne in Switzerland. But I say, you know, guys, I have half the budget of Zurich. If you would double my budget, I could tell you, we would be probably in the top 10. But now politically, we know that this would be very difficult to obtain. So we have to find different means. So you cannot cry and whine all day. You have to accept some of the things as they are, and you have to have different, and you have to adapt to different solutions to try to fill the gap. And I think you have to be bold, and I think you have to be brave. And to the academic leader, I always say, we are full of very bright people in our institution, but we don't have that many courageous people, because you have to face to be unpopular, which is very difficult sometimes. And you have to face the criticism when you do this. There's a lot of, you know, tears and pain while you do this. But now that I will step down at the end of the year, you know, there are things that we did wrong. But overall, I think we've showed that in Europe, we can build great universities. We can build world-class research universities. We need a couple of them so that in the world of tomorrow, all the kids would not only dream to go to the Stanfords or the MITs, but we should have about 10, 15 world-class research universities in Europe so that will attract the best students to our system. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.